When Japan bombed Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, many Americans were understandably enraged. One person was so incensed, in fact, that he fought the U.S. military for his right to fight. When he got his chance, it turned out to be an explosive experience. Literally. Jacklyn Jack Lucas was born on February 14, 1928, in Plymouth, North Carolina. Sadly, he was just 10 years old when his father died. Unable to cope with the significant loss in his life, he became quite a handful, forcing his mother to enroll him at the Edwards Military Institute in Salemburg. It was a good call, as the school gave Lucas the discipline and direction he needed. Already big for his age, he was a natural sportsman, taking up baseball, basketball, softball, wrestling, horseback riding, shooting, and hunting. The military academy transformed the grieving, unruly boy into a focused young man with a purpose. But when Pearl Harbor was attacked, that purpose crystallized into an obsession. #the Great Deception. Jack Lucas was only 13 years old when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, but the event ignited something fierce within him. While other boys his age were collecting scrap metal and buying war bonds, Lucas had grander ambitions. He wanted to fight. The problem was obvious. He was far too young. The minimum age for military service was 17 with parental consent and 18 without it. But Lucas had never been one to let obstacles stand in his way. Standing 6 feet tall and weighing over 200 pounds at just 14, he looked considerably older than his actual age. He hatched a plan. In 1942, at the age of 14, Lucas forged his mother's signature on an enlistment form and added 3 years to his birth date. The recruiter, seeing what appeared to be a strapping 17-year-old eager to serve his country, accepted his application without question. Just like that, Jack Lucas became a United States Marine. His mother, Lily Bell Lucas, was horrified. When Japan bombed Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, many Americans were understandably enraged. One person was so incensed, in fact, that he fought the U.S. military for his right to fight. When he got his chance, it turned out to be an explosive experience. Literally. Jacklyn Jack Lucas was born on February 14, 1928, in Plymouth, North Carolina. Sadly, he was just 10 years old when his father died. Unable to cope with the significant loss in his life, he became quite a handful, forcing his mother to enroll him at the Edwards Military Institute in Salemburg. It was a good call, as the school gave Lucas the discipline and direction he needed. Already big for his age, he was a natural sportsman, taking up baseball, basketball, softball, wrestling, horseback riding, shooting, and hunting. The military academy transformed the grieving, unruly boy into a focused young man with a purpose. But when Pearl Harbor was attacked, that purpose crystallized into an obsession. #the Great Deception. Jack Lucas was only 13 years old when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, but the event ignited something fierce within him. While other boys his age were collecting scrap metal and buying war bonds, Lucas had grander ambitions. He wanted to fight. The problem was obvious. He was far too young. The minimum age for military service was 17 with parental consent and 18 without it. But Lucas had never been one to let obstacles stand in his way. Standing 6 feet tall and weighing over 200 pounds at just 14, he looked considerably older than his actual age. He hatched a plan. In 1942, at the age of 14, Lucas forged his mother's signature on an enlistment form and added 3 years to his birth date. The recruiter, seeing what appeared to be a strapping 17-year-old eager to serve his country, accepted his application without question. Just like that, Jack Lucas became a United States Marine. His mother, Lily Bell Lucas, was horrified. When she discovered what her son had done, she immediately contacted the Marine Corps to inform them of the deception. But by then, Lucas was already deep into his training. The military, facing a desperate need for manpower as the war in the Pacific intensified, decided to look the other way. They would later come to be grateful for that decision. Lucas excelled in his training at Parris Island, South Carolina. His natural athleticism, combined with the discipline instilled at the Edwards Military Institute, made him a standout recruit. He absorbed everything the drill instructors threw at him, mastering marksmanship, hand-to-hand combat, and military tactics with an intensity that impressed even the most hardened veterans. However, Lucas's youth occasionally showed through his mature exterior. He was impulsive, sometimes reckless, and possessed an almost reckless courage that both worried and impressed his superiors. These qualities would define his military career in ways no one could have anticipated. After completing his training, Lucas was assigned to various duties stateside. He was stationed at Camp Lejeune in North Carolina, then later at Pearl Harbor itself. But being stationed in Hawaii wasn't enough for the young Marine. He hadn't lied about his age and defied his mother just to spend the war loading supplies and standing guard duty. He wanted to see combat. By early 1945, Lucas had been in the Marines for nearly 3 years and hadn't fired a single shot in anger. Now 17 years old, he watched with growing frustration as combat units prepared to ship out to fight in the Pacific while he remained behind. The war was intensifying, with American forces island-hopping toward Japan itself, and Lucas was determined not to miss it. In January 1945, Lucas learned that the 5th Marine Division was preparing for a major operation. Though he didn't know the specifics, he knew this was his chance. The young Marine made a bold decision that would have gotten most soldiers court-martialed. He went AWOL. Lucas stowed away aboard the USS Duel, a transport ship carrying the 1st Battalion, 26th Marines to their unknown destination. For days, he hid in the ship, sneaking food and water, avoiding detection by the crew and officers. When he was finally discovered, the ship was already at sea, too far from port to turn back. The officers aboard were furious. Here was a private who had deserted his post, stowed away on a combat vessel, and violated numerous military regulations. Under normal circumstances, Lucas would have faced severe punishment, possibly even a dishonorable discharge. But these weren't normal circumstances. The ship's commander faced a dilemma. They were headed into one of the most crucial operations of the Pacific War, and returning this young Marine to Hawaii would require resources they couldn't spare. Moreover, there was something about Lucas's determination that resonated with the combat-hardened Marines aboard. He hadn't gone AWOL to avoid duty. He'd done it to find it. After stern warnings and threats of court-martial, they assigned him to C Company, 1st Battalion, 26th Marines, 5th Marine Division. Lucas had finally gotten his wish. He was going into combat. The destination was an 8-square-mile volcanic island that would become synonymous with heroism and sacrifice. Iwo Jima. On February 19, 1945, American forces launched their assault on Iwo Jima. The tiny island, located 760 miles south of Tokyo, was of immense strategic importance. Its airfields would provide a base for fighter escorts for B-29 bombers attacking Japan, and an emergency landing strip for damaged aircraft returning from raids. The Japanese knew this and had fortified the island with over 21,000 troops, miles of underground tunnels, and countless pillboxes, bunkers, and artillery positions. The volcanic rock of the island had been transformed into a nearly impregnable fortress. The American command estimated the island would fall in 5 days. It would take 36 days and cost nearly 7,000 American lives, with another 20,000 wounded. Jack Lucas waded ashore on D-Day with his unit, his boots sinking into the strange black volcanic sand that would become iconic in American military history. The beach was a nightmare of explosions, machine gun fire, and screaming men. Japanese artillery and mortars rained down on the Marines, who struggled to find cover on the exposed beaches. Within minutes of landing, Lucas saw more death and destruction than he had imagined in his worst nightmares. But the 17-year-old didn't falter. Drawing on his training and his natural courage, he moved forward with his unit, fighting his way inland meter by bloody meter. For the next 4 days, Lucas participated in some of the most brutal fighting of the Pacific War. The Japanese defenders fought with fanatical determination, and every yard of ground cost American lives. Lucas proved himself a capable Marine, following orders, keeping his head down, and doing his job. His youth and inexperience were offset by his physical strength, his marksmanship skills, and an almost supernatural fearlessness. Other Marines in his unit began to notice the kid who had stowed away to join them. He might have been young, but he was a fighter. On the morning of February 20th, 1945, Lucas's unit was engaged in clearing Japanese positions in the northern part of the island. The fighting was exhausting and terrifying. The Japanese had created an intricate network of caves and tunnels, and Marines never knew when or where the enemy would appear. Lucas was part of a four-man patrol moving through a ravine when they suddenly came under fire from a Japanese trench. In the chaos of combat, Lucas and his fellow Marine, Private First Class Brian Sledge, found themselves separated from the other two members of their team. They dove for cover behind a rocky outcropping as bullets snapped through the air around them. What happened next would take only a few seconds but would echo through history. Lucas spotted a Japanese position ahead and, with Sledge, began maneuvering toward it. As they crawled forward, they suddenly found themselves on the lip of a ravine, staring down at 11 Japanese soldiers in a trench just feet below them. Before either Marine could react, the Japanese soldiers spotted them and immediately threw 2 grenades up at the Americans. Time seemed to slow down. Lucas saw the grenades tumbling through the air, saw them land in the soft volcanic ash between him and Sledge. He saw other Marines nearby, 3 men who had taken cover close to their position. In that fraction of a second, Jack Lucas, 17 years old, had to make a choice. He could dive away and try to save himself. He could shout a warning and hope everyone could find cover in time. Or he could do something that went against every human instinct for self-preservation. Lucas made his choice. Without hesitation, he pushed Sledge away and threw himself on top of one grenade, pulling it beneath his body. As he landed, he spotted the second grenade and reached out, pulling it under him as well. He compressed his body as tightly as he could, trying to cover both grenades with his flesh and bones, making himself into a human shield. The grenades exploded. The blast was devastating. One grenade detonated fully beneath Lucas's body, while the second exploded partially. The force of the explosions should have killed him instantly. Instead, through what can only be described as a miracle, Lucas survived. His body absorbed the full force of the blasts. Shrapnel tore through him in over 200 places. His chest was ripped open, exposing his organs. His wrist was nearly severed, held on by threads of tissue. His face and neck were shredded by metal fragments. One piece of shrapnel lodged just millimeters from his heart. Another piece embedded itself in his lung. Blood poured from countless wounds, soaking into the black volcanic sand. But he was alive. The Marines around him were stunned. Sledge, who Lucas had pushed away, was wounded but survived. The other nearby Marines were injured but alive. By all rights, Lucas should have been dead. The force of 2 grenades exploding beneath a human body should have torn him apart. Yet somehow his large, athletic frame, combined with the volcanic sand that partially absorbed some of the blast, had saved his life barely. A Navy corpsman rushed to Lucas's side, took one look at his horrific injuries, and prepared to move on to men who actually had a chance of survival. But another Marine stopped him, insisting they try to save the kid. The corpsman went to work, applying tourniquets, packing wounds, doing everything he could to keep Lucas alive long enough to get him to medical evacuation. Lucas drifted in and out of consciousness as they carried him to the beach on a stretcher. Through the haze of pain and shock, he heard Marines talking about what he had done. He heard someone say he had saved at least 3 lives, maybe more. He tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. At the beach, they loaded him onto a landing craft and transported him to the USS Samaritan, a hospital ship. Doctors aboard immediately began emergency surgery, working frantically. To save the young Marine's life, they removed over 200 pieces of shrapnel, repaired torn blood vessels, and stitched together lacerated organs. The surgery lasted hours. Several times they nearly lost him. Against all medical expectations, Jack Lucas survived the night. Then he survived another day, and another. His youth and his remarkable physical condition, honed by years of athletics and military training, helped him cling to life when any reasonable prognosis said he should be dead. Lucas's recovery was agonizing and prolonged. He was transferred from the hospital ship to military hospitals in Guam, then to Hawaii, and finally to naval hospitals in the United States. He endured 26 surgeries over the next several months. Doctors removed hundreds of pieces of shrapnel, but many pieces remained embedded in his body, too deep or too dangerous to extract. He would carry those souvenirs of Iwo Jima for the rest of his life. The young Marine had to learn to walk again. The injuries to his legs and the damage to his nervous system left him partially paralyzed. Physical therapists worked with him daily, pushing him through exercises that left him exhausted and in agony. But Lucas possessed the same determination that had led him to forge enlistment papers and stow away on a combat ship. He refused to give up. News of Lucas's heroic action had spread through the Marine Corps. The young private who had gone AWOL to reach combat had thrown himself on not one but two grenades to save his fellow Marines. It was an act of selfless courage that exemplified the highest traditions of the Corps. On October 5, 1945, at the age of 17, Private First Class Jacklyn H. Lucas was awarded the Medal of Honor by President Harry S. Truman in a ceremony at the White House. He became the youngest Marine and the youngest service member in World War II to receive the nation's highest military decoration. He was also the youngest Medal of Honor recipient since the Civil War. President Truman, placing the medal around Lucas's neck, told him, "I'd rather have this medal than be President of the United States." Lucas, still recovering from his injuries and overwhelmed by the attention, simply replied, "Sir, I'll swap with you." Jack Lucas's life after receiving the Medal of Honor was as dramatic and complicated as his wartime service. He became a national hero, celebrated in newspapers and newsreels across the country. The teenager who had lied about his age to join the Marines was now famous, his story inspiring millions of Americans as the war drew to a close. But heroism on the battlefield doesn't always translate to peace at home. Lucas struggled with the transition to civilian life. His injuries continued to cause him pain, and pieces of shrapnel that couldn't be removed would occasionally work their way to the surface of his skin, requiring additional medical procedures. He underwent more surgeries in the years following the war, bringing his total to 26 operations. The young veteran also grappled with what would later be recognized as post-traumatic stress disorder, though at the time, such conditions were poorly understood and rarely treated. He had nightmares about Iwo Jima, about the grenades, about the faces of the men he'd seen die on that volcanic island. Lucas attempted to complete his education. Using the GI Bill, he enrolled in college, determined to make something of himself beyond his wartime heroism. He attended several universities but struggled to focus on academics. The young man who had been so desperate to fight now found it difficult to sit in a classroom and study. He eventually graduated from business school and worked various jobs, including a stint as a businessman and sales representative. In 1961, at the age of 33, Lucas enlisted in the Army's 82nd Airborne Division, seeking to recapture some of the purpose and camaraderie he had known in the Marines. He earned his parachutist wings, an impressive feat for someone with his extensive injuries. However, this second military career was short-lived. His old wounds and the toll they had taken on his body led to his retirement from military service in 1965. Lucas was married several times and had children, but his relationships were often troubled. The same impulsiveness and intensity that had driven him to lie about his age and stow away on a combat ship sometimes created difficulties in his personal life. Despite his personal struggles, Jack Lucas never forgot what his Medal of Honor represented. He attended military reunions, spoke at schools and veteran organizations, and worked to preserve the memory of those who fought at Iwo Jima. He became particularly close with other Medal of Honor recipients, forming bonds with men who understood the weight of the decoration and the burden of being called a hero. Lucas was always quick to deflect praise, insisting that the real heroes were the ones who didn't come home, the men who lay buried in military cemeteries or whose bodies were never recovered. He spoke of the Marines he'd served with, men whose names the public would never know but who had fought with equal courage. In his later years, Lucas lived in Mississippi, where he became a respected member of his community. He participated in Medal of Honor conventions and ceremonies, standing alongside other recipients from World War II, Korea, Vietnam, and later conflicts. He took pride in his service but remained humble about his actions on Iwo Jima. The pieces of shrapnel that remained in his body continued to cause problems throughout his life. Some worked their way to the surface decades after the war, requiring removal. Others remained lodged near vital organs, constant reminders of that February morning when he had made the split-second decision to sacrifice himself for his fellow Marines. Lucas also became an advocate for veterans' causes, particularly for younger veterans struggling with the transition to civilian life. He understood their challenges firsthand and worked to ensure they received the support and recognition they deserved. Jack Lucas lived a long life, defying the doctors who said he shouldn't have survived his wounds. He died on June 5, 2008, at the age of 80, from leukemia. He was buried with full military honors at Arlington National Cemetery, his final resting place among the nation's heroes. His funeral was attended by fellow Medal of Honor recipients, Marines from various generations, and family members. The Marine Corps provided full honors with a flag-draped casket, a rifle salute, and the playing of taps. It was a fitting tribute to a man who had embodied the Marine Corps motto, Semper Fidelis, always faithful. Lucas's story remains one of the most remarkable in American military history. At an age when most teenagers were worried about homework and high school dances, he was fighting in one of the bloodiest battles of World War II. At an age when most young people are just beginning to understand mortality, he had made the conscious choice to die so that others might live. The Medal of Honor citation that accompanied his award reads in part, "For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty, his exceptional valor and heroism, in the face of almost certain death, were in keeping with the highest traditions of the U.S. Naval Service." But those formal words, as accurate as they are, don't fully capture what Jack Lucas did. In that fraction of a second on Iwo Jima, a 17-year-old boy became the embodiment of selfless courage. He didn't just risk his life. He threw it away, certain that he was about to die, motivated only by the desire to save his fellow Marines. The fact that he survived is almost secondary to the choice he made. In that moment, Jack Lucas demonstrated the kind of heroism that transcends age, rank, or circumstance. He showed what humans are capable of when they put the welfare of others above their own survival. Today, Jack Lucas's story continues to inspire new generations of Marines and Americans. His Medal of Honor is displayed at military museums, and his image appears in documentaries about Iwo Jima and World War II. Schools teach children about the teenage Marine who threw himself on grenades to save his comrades. But perhaps his greatest legacy is not the medal or the recognition. It's the lives he saved. The Marines who survived because of Lucas's action went on to have families, careers, and lives of their own. Their children and grandchildren exist because Jack Lucas made a split-second decision on a volcanic island in 1945. The ripples of that single act of heroism continue to spread through generations. Lucas himself would probably be uncomfortable with such grandiose assessments of his legacy. He always maintained that he simply did what any Marine would have done in that situation. But the evidence suggests otherwise. Human nature is to survive, to protect oneself, to live. What Jack Lucas did was supernatural in its courage, extraordinary in the selflessness. The boy who lied about his age to join the Marines, who went AWOL to reach combat, who threw himself on not one but two grenades to save his fellow warriors. That boy became a legend. Not because he sought glory or recognition, but because when the moment came, he chose to sacrifice everything for his brothers in arms. That is the true story of Jacklyn Harold Lucas, the youngest Marine to receive the Medal of Honor in World War II, and one of the greatest heroes America has ever produced. His life reminds us that heroism knows no age limit, that courage can be found in the most unexpected places, and that sometimes the greatest act a person can perform is to be willing to die so that others may live. Jack Lucas lived for 63 years after that fateful day on Iwo Jima, but his immortality was assured in those few seconds when he threw himself on two grenades. In doing so, he joined the pantheon of American heroes whose deeds will never be forgotten, whose courage will always inspire, and whose sacrifice will forever remind us of the best that humanity has to offer.